All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, the Alba Mishpacha, for dedicating all the shiur midrashos this month in memory of their beloved husband, father, Jerry Yaakov Koppel ben Avram Menachem Zichron Livracha. We thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber, our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Shvat, for dedicating all of the shiur midrashos this month in memory of her husband, Avi Strimber, Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama Slav and Aliyah and the families in Nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Moshe and Ellen Givant, in merit of and Ellen's mother, Joyce Rubin Blockman, Nechama Bas Shlomo Yitzchak, on the occasion of her third yahrzeit. We thank the Getz Mishpacha for their dedication of week of learning in memory of Moshe Chaim's father and mother, Alter Hirsch ben Binyamin and Chana Chaya Bas Moshe. We thank Mr. Larry Sufnis for dedicating the week of learning in memory of his beloved wife Tanya Yona Bas Yaakov. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families in Nechama. We thank our Day of Learning sponsor, the Buchwalter family, in memory of Walter Buchwalter, Chaim Zev Ben Yitzchak Aryeh Halevi, on the occasion of his Shloshim. And we thank our Daf Yomi sponsor, Adam Plunka, for the yahrzeit of Yerachmiel Herschel Ben Liba. And we thank Bennett Goldberg for his dedication of Daf Yomi, as Baruch Hashem Bennett celebrates his 66th birthday today. Incredible. We wish Bennett an incredible happy birthday, Meve Esim Shalom Tovos, and we hope that all of the neshamas have an aliyah and their families a nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. So a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Samech 65, and we are picking up on Samech Dalid Amid Beis, and we are picking up 64b, and we are picking up Emir Hashem at Shachat Yisrael V'Kibel HaKohen, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. I want to point out, it was very interesting. I know that the kidney story with Agrippas went ahead and generated a lot of interest at the Shir. So when I was giving the Shir yesterday, I don't know why, but I assumed, which was a wrong assumption, that sheep only have one kidney. But Menachem Schoenfeld pointed out to me after the shir, and actually a couple of the chevra pointed out to me afterwards, and mamish, a lot of veterinary experts in the shir, Baruch Hashem, that sheep actually have two kidneys. So obviously, again, I both say. So then, again, the way the story reads is that ultimately they saw that when Agrippas wanted to count, they counted 600,000 korbanos. I said 1.2 million. 600,000 korbanos, which makes a lot more sense, obviously. 600,000 korbanos, and then if you do the math of the Gemara with 10 people on a korban, 6 million Jews. Okay, so 6 million Jews, excluding anyone who is b'derech rechoka, too far away, or ultimately again tamei. So those numbers are a bit more probable, and then one does not have to go ahead and kind of make it out to be that the numbers are a bit hyperbolic. So thank you for all. I'm sorry? Yosei Kiv. No, so it could be, but what it could be is, so I was thinking about that. Yosei Kiflaim Ki Yosei Mitzrayim. So that's why I thought it was also 1.2 million, but it could also be, maybe that's the number of Klal Yisrael. Because if you look at the Lashon of the Gemara, so it was Bikesh Agrippas Litin Einav Bu'ochlesei Yisrael. That maybe Agrippas wanted an idea of all of Klal Yisrael. So Karban Pesach represented one chelik of Klal Yisrael, but even those who didn't bring Derech Rechoka or Timeim, so once you see the number of people who kind of brought Karban Pesach, that gives you an idea of Kol Ochlesei Yisrael. Okay, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure. I've tried to look around a little bit for a little bit more specific, but again, you both say it's your follow-up homework. Anyway, both say let's go weiter. So let's go right there. So the Gemara says, "Shachat Yisrael v'kibel hakohen." So the Gemara says, so remember, the Yisrael shechted the carbon, and ultimately the Kohen did kabbalah. So the Gemara says, "Lo sagya delav Yisrael hi." So the Gemara says, I don't understand. It makes it sound like that the shechita of the carbon Pesach dafka had to be done by a Yisrael. But why is that? And I was supposed to say, Kohen could also do the shechita. So the Gemara says, "Higufa kamash malon the shechita bizar kshera." No. Actually, what the Mishnah is coming to teach about say is that you are allowed, that a zar, a non-Kohen, is permitted to do the shechita. That's the chiddush over here. That even a non-Kohen is permitted to do shechita. So the Gemara says, The Kibala Kohen, and why does it say that the Kohen did Kabbalah? Isn't that obvious? Hakamash Malon did make Kabbalah ve'ilach mitzvahs kuna. Supposed to teach me that from Kabbalah and on requires a Kohen. Supposed to this, of course, is not unique by Karban Pesach. This is true in general by Karbanos. We pass in Shchita Kshera Bizarre. A non-Kohen is permitted to do the Shchita, but from Kabbalah, which is the receiving of the blood, and on, that must be done by a Kohen. Noston lechavero. So we'll say ultimately against. Remember, one coin gives it to another coin. Remember, they had the assembly line where the coin would receive the bowl with blood. So right, coin, we'll call him coin number one, would do the Kabbalah. He would receive the blood in the bowl with the pointed bottom, and then the assembly line would take it all the way up to the mizbeach. So it's actually very interesting. Shamas mina holacha shelo beregel havi holacha. So we'll say the Gemara says, by the way, there's an interesting fact that comes out of this, which is holacha shelo beregel. Remember, we'll say holacha, right? Transporting the blood from the site of the animal to the mizbeach is one of the avodos, right? Remember again, there's shchita, slaughtering, Kabbalah, receiving of the blood, holacha, transport of the blood from the place of shchita to the mizbeach, and then zrika, sprinkling of the blood on the mizbeach. So we'll say, the Gemara says something very interesting from here, that holacha, even without physical movement, is called holacha. Now, where does the Gemara glean that from? Because we'll say, remember again, how is the blood getting from the animal to the mizbeach? How is it getting there? It's being passed, the assembly line. No Kohen is actually moving his feet. So with Pashtos, you see from here that halacha, even that halacha shelo beregel is called halacha. Now Rashi points out over here, this happens to be a machlokes that is recorded. So the Gemara Rashi says, "Uplugtihi b'shili parakama dizvachim." This is actually machlokes in the Gemara about whether or not halacha shelo beregel, halacha without movement, is called halacha. But it's clear from the Gemara here that halacha shelo beregel is proper halacha. Domohu nayid porta. Well, maybe not. Rosen Rabbi say maybe even though one coin is moving, is handing it to the next, maybe he moves a little bit. In other words, he moves his feet before he gives it to the next coin. So there is a holacha beregel. The elamai kamash balan. So we'll say, so what's the chiddush of it? In other words, why do we have all of the kohanim? So we'll say it's actually very interesting. See, we've presupposed that the reason they had the assembly line of kohanim was for what purpose? What purpose? Efficiency. Efficiency. But pashtos, that's what we assume. The Gemara says, maybe not. The Gemara says it could also be because Hakamash Malon Birov Am Hadras Melech. Rashi says, Birov Am Hadras Melech, Shehayu Kulon Asukin Ba'avoda. That there is a greater, literally, Birov Am Hadras Melech means with the multitude of the people, there is Hadras, there is a beauty for the king. That the more people you have participating in the mitzvah, the more beautiful the mitzvah is. So we'll say, so essentially, Karban Pesach becomes a national endeavor, right? All of the Kohanim are mobilized. Klal Yisrael is packing into the Azara. The more people you have involved, ultimately, again, the greater the intensity of the beautification of the mitzvah. So we'll say, so again, it's both. In other words, obviously, there's an efficiency component over here as well. In other words, you have got a constant flow of blood going to the mizbeach, empty utensils making their way back, but there's also a din of berov am hadras melech. Quite beautiful. Kibalas hamale umachsiras harekan. So we'll say it's actually quite a beautiful idea the Gemara says over here. So remember, we'll say what the Gemara is pointing out is like this. So if you can imagine, so remember, we'll call him, right, Yisrael is shechting his karban, Kohen does the Kabbalah. Once he receives the blood, they pass the blood up the assembly line to the mizbeach. Good. So we'll say, so remember again, in any given moment, let's assume for a moment that the Kohen who receives the blood, he's Kohen A. He's Kohen A, right? And the Kohen at the end of the line is Kohen Z. So remember, at any given moment, when A hands to B a bowl with blood, so remember again, B also has an empty one that he's ready to give back to A. So what the Gemara is pointing out is something very interesting. If you notice here, there's an order. So what ends up happening is that A gives to B receives ultimately the full one, and he gives back to A the empty one. But we don't do the opposite. In other words, remember again, you could hold the bowl in one hand, so you could have B gives A the empty one, and then A gives B the full one. That's not the order. That's not the order. The order is A gives the full one to B, and then B gives the empty one to A. So the Gemara says, what's the reason? Aval ipchalo, Shimon ben Lakish, Ein ma'avirin al ha-mitzvahs. Because Rabbi say literally again, we do not pass over mitzvahs. Because Rabbi say, listen to this. If B would hand back to A the empty one first, effectively what's happening over here is that B is passing over the full bowl of blood, ultimately giving the empty one, and then taking the blood. Rabbi say, so he would be effectively passing over the mitzvahs. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Aval Ipcha, it's 5 lines up from the bottom. Maxir Sarekin Baresha. We do not go out, we don't have B give back the empty bowl first. The lo demichi moshit le hai miyad. So we'll say a truly beautiful idea. So we ultimately, again, we don't have the returning of the empty bowl first and then the taking of the full bowl. Rather, again, first B will take the full bowl, then ultimately, again, return the empty bowl, because ein ma'avirin al ha-mitzvahs. We do not pass over mitzvahs. We'll say, so you have to understand something that's so profound over here, which is even if you look at the workings, right? We'll say, so in the Mishnah we read how everything worked. And now what are you beginning to see? That every aspect of how this worked was b'chachma. Everything was with wisdom. In other words, there was nothing that was haphazard. It says an assembly line. I say, oh, assembly line is efficiency. No, I mean, yes, assembly line is efficiency, but assembly line is also berov am hadras melech. You go out and you receive the full one, then give back the empty one. Why? Ein ma'avirin al ha-mitzvah. So Shabbos says such a profound yisod. Remember, the Jew went to the Beis Hamikdash because in the Beis Hamikdash you saw how to structure a meaningful life. And Rabbi say, what does a meaningful life mean? A meaningful life means that I can look at any aspect of my life and it's done b'chachma. It's done with Rabbi say, how many times are there things that we do in life that make no sense, or they're just illogical or counterproductive? And just because it's the way we've been doing it, so we keep doing it, whether it's in our personal lives, our relationships, and our religious lives. So we'll say, so the goal is that if somebody else were to look at a piece of my life, any chiluk of my life, they could say, oh, that's done b'chachma. That makes sense. That's logical. There's a wisdom to it. Every single detail over here in the way Pesach was structured, or Erev Pesach was structured in the Beis Hamikdash was b'chachma. Every aspect of my life, I have to strive that it's done b'chachma. But there's a beautiful vart on ein ma'avirin ala mitzvos. Just remind me, if we have time at the end of the shir, I'll come back to it. So the Gemara says this follows. Kohen hakar leitzalam mizbeach. So as I say, remember again, the Kohen who was closest to the mizbeach, he went ahead and he poured the blood on the yesod, right, on the base of the mizbeach. I will say now, remember, as I pointed out yesterday in the Mishnah, this was not a zrika. Right? Remember, again, I will say zrika is like a sprinkling with your finger. This was the Kohen poured the entire bowl on the base of the mizbeach. To which the Gemara says, "Man tana Pesach b'zrika." So ultimately, again, who says that literally you throw the blood, literally throw the blood on the base of the mizbeach? I'm Rav Chis Rabbi Yosef Galili. Desan Rabbi Yosef Galili. Desan Rabbi Yosef Galili. Omer es damam tizrok ala mizbeach ves chalbam takdir. It says their blood, plural, you shall throw on the mizbeach, and their chelav, the fats, you shall burn. Damolo ne'emar. It doesn't say its blood. Ella damam, their blood. Chelbolo ne'emar, ella chelbam. It doesn't say its chelev, but rather it says their chelev. Limet al bachar umeiser upesach shein tuunin matan damin ve'mur legab mizbeach. Ultimately, we learn from here that bachar, right, bachar offering, meiser offering, and Pesach all require blood applications and a mur and sacrificial parts of the mizbeach. Minolam detunin yisod. How do you know that the blood is poured at the base of the mizbeach? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar, Asya zrika me'ola. We learn Gzer Shav of zrika from Ola. Ksiv hacha as damam tizrak ala mizbeach, u ksiv hasam tizarku b'nei Aaron hakohanim as damam ala mizbeach saviv ma'ola tu'una yisod af Pesach nami tu'una yisod. So it was like Gzer Shava between Pesach and Ola. Just like Ola, we know that you go ahead and you pour the blood on the base of the mizbeach. So to ultimately, again, Pesach, you will also pour it on the base of the mizbeach. Top of Samechei, va'ola gufa minalan. And I will say, Ola itself, how do you know that Ola is poured on the yisod? Amar Kra. So I will say this is pretty explicit. Amar Kra, al yisod mizbach ha'ola alma tu'una yisod. So I will say by Ola is pretty explicit. It says al yisod ha'mizbeach. Gzera Shava between Ola and Pesach, just like the blood of the Ola is poured on the Yisod, so too the blood of Pesach is poured on the Yisod as well. Beautiful. So we'll say, so again, so now I just, I can't, I just want one thing very quickly. The Sefer HaChinuch brings down that why is there a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel? Right? Why is there a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel? 3 times a year, why do you have to go up to the Beis HaMikdash? So we normally think, or we normally assume that the reason for it is it creates a sense of achdus, unity and klal Yisrael, which is absolutely true. But the Sefer HaChinuch also says something different. He says because when you go up to the Beis HaMikdash, you see the Kohen Gadol, you see the Kohanim, and the Kohanim become role models for how to live spiritual lives. And you see the Nisim of the Beis HaMikdash. And those Nisim, ultimately, again, each of them carried incredible, important, and dynamic life lessons. And I'm just pointing out, when you went to give your Karban Pesach, and now Abba say we saw exactly how the Avoda went, and now we see how every single piece of the Avoda was done b'chachma. Everything had a message. Everything had a lesson. So you come up to the Beis HaMikdash and you leave energized with all of these impactful and dynamic life lessons to enrich your personal life. Everything I do has to be done b'chachma. Everything I do should make sense. Everything I do should have a rhyme or reason. Everything I do should be embedded in some type of deeper, life morality and life ruchnius. This is what you got just from going up to the Beis HaMikdash to offer up your Korban Pesach. It's incredible. So the Gemara goes back there. Yotzes HaKas Rishona. Supposed to say this is great. So remember again, there were 3 groups. Right? So the first group left, second group came in, second group left, third group came in. So watch this. Tana, hi nikras kat atzlonis. The third group, they were called the lazy group. The lazy group. So the Gemara said, but 1 second, that's not fair. V'ha lo sagi de lav hachi. So the Gemara said, but remember again, see, it's a little bit not fair. Why is it not fair? Because remember again, how many groups do you have to have? You have to have 3 groups. You have to have 3 groups. So we'll say, so remember again, so on one hand, you're disparaging the chevra that's late, that comes in part 3. But we learned yesterday's daf kal eda Yisrael. So you have to have 3 groups. So the third group is necessary. So why are you disparaging by calling them the lazy group? I said, this is great. This is great. Afilu hachi ibayluhu lezeruzin afshayu. Tirush says, you're right. You're right. There's always going to be a third group. But what? You don't have to be a part of it. You don't have to be a part of it. Yeah, you're right. There's always going to be people who come late. That's absolutely true. You don't have to be a latecomer. You could be part of group number 1. So I'll say there's a great Gemara Kedisanya. Rabbi Omer, I'afshar le'olam b'la bosem b'la borsi. The world needs both perfumers and tanners. Now, both say those are opposite professions, right? Because remember, again, perfumer, you're around fragrant scents all day, right? Fragrant smells. And by definition, Baruch Hashem, you smell like a fragrant person. If you've ever gone to a tannery before, it's terrible, right? Mamish, the odor is overwhelming to the point that, again, if you work in a tannery, at least in the times of the Gemara, it was understood that stench was going to attach itself to you. So the world needs both perfumers and tanners. But ashrei mi she'um nasa bosem, ay lo lemi she'um nasa barsi. Right? Praiseworthy is the person who is a perfumer. Woe to the person, ultimately, again, who is a tanner. So we'll say, so what the Gemara is highlighting over here is, you're right. There are always things that are necessary, but you make a choice where you put yourself in life. So the world always needs a third group. Always needs a third group. You make a choice if you want to be the latecomer or not. So Gemara gives another example. This is actually pretty dramatic as well. The world needs both boys and girls. Ashrei mi shebanav zacharim. Praiseworthy is the person who has sons. Ay lo lemi shebanav nekevos. Woe to the person who has daughters. So I'll say, so let's talk about this. So just the father of 4 girls, Baruch Hashem. So remember, any father of daughters understands this Gemara immediately, that not as a disparaging of daughters. And I will say, Eina Doma, the worry that a father has over girls than what a father has over sons. Right? Your sons, whatever, they're going to figure it out. One way or another. But a daughter, by definition, a father is incredibly protective of, and a father is perpetually worried about. So the Gemara says, so it's not Chazal being misogynistic, chas v'shalom, or saying something disparaging, or just fakir. The Chazal are echoing a real sentiment in parenting, right? The world needs boys and girls, needs men and women, but the truth is the worry that a parent carries about a daughter is dramatically more than the worry that a parent carries over a son. So the Gemara will say, so this is such a profound Gemara, because I will say, think of it just a moment, yeah, there always has to be a third group, but it doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be you. You don't have to be the guy who comes in late to Carbon Pesach. You don't have to be the guy who comes, you don't have to be the straggler. Right? There are always on-time people and late people. You're right, there's always going to be late people. Actually, olam below late people, right? That's the way it works. But it doesn't have to be you. It's going to always be someone. But lav dafka, it has to be you. You don't have to be the tanner. You could be the perfumer. You don't have to be the third group. You could be the first group. An incredible Gemara. So as I remember again, so the Mishnah said, it's actually very interesting now. So the Mishnah said the process that we described in the Beis HaMikdash was the same thing on Shabbos and the same thing during the week. So I'll say then the Gemara went on to explain that on Shabbos, the Kohanim did something that the Rabbanim did not like. Remember again, what did they do? They essentially plugged, remember there was a channel of water that ran through the Azara. They plugged up the channel, allowed the water of the Azara, the courtyard, to flood, then unplugged and washed away all of the blood. So the rabbis did not like this. Shelo b'ritzon man. So whose opinion were they acting against? Or I should say, according to who was this not a proper practice? Amar Rav Chisda, Shelo b'ritzon Rabbi Eliezer. This is very interesting. This was against the will of Rabbi Eliezer. We'll see. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Shelo b'ritzon Rabbi Eliezer. Do Amar ba'alma gabe mechabe dahainu dumya dahadacha ikachiv chata. So Rabbi says we're going to see in just a moment. The act of flooding the floor is the same type of thing as sweeping. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, sweeping on Shabbos is asr midoraisa. So we spoke about this before, that sweeping on Shabbos, let's say on an interior area, is an issue of bona, is an issue of building. Now, truth is, we'll say, we paskin that way as well, just not doraisa, dirabanon. That's why, again, you can't sweep dirt floors on Shabbos because of ashvuye gumos. You may come to go ahead and we had this in Smichas Chavar a couple of weeks ago. You may come to go ahead and flatten out depressions on the ground, which could be an issue of bona, an issue of building. But whereas we hold that it is an Isser D'Rabbanon, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that it is an Isser D'Oraisa, to which the Gemara says, the Irabbanon, Ha'amri Shvusu. According to the Rabbanon, they also agree that halacha l'maisa, sweeping on Shabbos, is an Isser D'Rabbanon, which is fine. The Ein Shavuos B'Mikdash, Shavuos say in general we hold that Isurei D'Rabbanon do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. Shavuos say everyone agrees that sweeping on Shabbos is problematic, which again is effectively what you're doing when you plug up the channel in the courtyard. You're sweeping out the blood. You're just doing it with water instead of a broom. Rabbi Eliezer holds it's an Isser D'Oraisa, and therefore you cannot do it even in the Beis HaMikdash. The Chacham would hold it's an Isser D'Rabbanon, and Ein Shavuos B'Mikdash. Isrei D'Rabbanon do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say now the Gemara is going to analyze this, or I should say, expound on this a little bit more. Maihi. Where exactly do we find this conversation? This Sanya, here we go. Echad hacholev, if you milk an animal on Shabbos, or mechabetz, or you curdle milk on Shabbos, megabein, make cheese on Shabbos. If you do this in the amount kigrogeres, if you do this in the amount of a dried fig, ultimately, again, you are going to be chayiv. So both say, interestingly enough, milking an animal is an issue of dash, right? Is an issue of dash, mefarek, right? Separating one thing from another. Ultimately, making cheese is a problem. Ultimately, of bona, of building. I'm just quoting. We'll see the Rashi in just a little bit. Mechabetz, which means curdling, is an issue of borer. So the Gemara says, "Hamechabit v'hamerabetz." If you sweep a floor on Shabbos, merabetz Shabbos means you go ahead and you sprinkle water to keep the dust down on the floor. V'harode chalos devash, or you go ahead and you remove honeycombs from a beehive. So b'shogeg b'Shabbos chayiv chatos. If you do this accidentally on Shabbos, you're chayiv chatos. Hizid b'yomtiv. If you do it intentionally on Yom Tov, lokes har boim, you get malchus tirei Eliezer. Suppose I say, so again, for our purposes, what are we focused on over here? We're focused on mechabit, sweeping. So you see that according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you go ahead and you sweep a floor on Shabbos, that is an Isser Da'oraisa. Now she points out, because an issue of Ashvuye Gumos. It's an issue ultimately, again, of leveling out depressions in the ground, which is a problem of bona, a problem of building. Because remember, again, you can't build on an area until when? Until it's flat. Sefer Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that sweeping a floor on Shabbos is going to be in Isser Da'oraisa. That is why he did not like what the Kohanim did in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. The Chum say, no, echad zeh v'echad zeh, ain't no ela mishum Shabbos. The Chum disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, and they say that halacha l'maisa, echad zeh v'echad zeh. And I will say, the Chum don't agree on the earlier cases, ultimately of cholev, mechabetz, and megabing. They disagree on the latter cases of mechamed, merabetz, and roda, of sweeping, sprinkling water on dirt to keep it down, and removing honeycombs. They hold ultimately again that is only an Isser D'Rabbanan. Only an Isser D'Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so the point over here is, so now let's just plug this back. So therefore the Mishnah said that what the Kohanim did was shelo beratzon chachamim, was not with the consent of the sages. Which sage specifically? Rabbi Eliezer. Because Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that, quote unquote, sweeping a floor on Shabbos is an Isser Da'oraisa. And halacha l'maisa, the act of flooding the Azara and allowing the water to take out the blood will be an Isser, maybe an Isser Da'oraisa. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Nosson so it could even be that it's not just Rabbi Eliezer, but it's Rabbi Nosson. This is actually very interesting. We're familiar with the concept of Ein Shavus B'Mikdash, which means that rabbinic law, rabbinic prohibitions do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. I will say, when is that true? That's true when we're dealing with an actual form of temple service, right? So if a particular form of temple service, quote unquote, transgresses an Issur D'Rabbanan, we say Ein Shavus B'Mikdash. But I will say, when the Issur D'Rabbanan has nothing to do with the Avoda anymore, it could very well be that the Issur still applies. So I will say, so remember again, when are you cleaning out the blood from the Azara? When are you cleaning it out? After everything is finished. Is that part of the Avoda? No. So it's quite possible that it's not just Rabbi Eliezer didn't like this practice, but even Rabbi Nosson, who agrees that yes, in general, in Shavus B'Mikdash, that's what he calls a Shavus Tzricha. When you have to violate the Shavus for the purpose of sacrificial service, that's when you can violate a Shavus on Shabbos. But halacha l'maisa, cleaning out the blood after the karbanos are done, that's not necessary. That's not part of the avodah. Okay, now don't get me wrong. I understand why you want to do it, but l'maisa, you could just as easily wait until the end of Shabbos to do that as well. Therefore, it's possible that many people didn't like this actual process, or this actual practice, I should say. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kos Chaim Amalei. Suppose listen to this. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda said that after all of the karbanos were done, what would they do? The Kohen would fill up a cup of blood from the floor. That cup of blood represented a mixture of all of the bloods, right? All of the blood from all the various karbanos, and he would pour that on the mizbeach. So Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kos Chaim Amalei Midamatarobes. So we'll say, so the Kohen used to go ahead and fill up a cup of blood from the mixed blood, right, of all the karbanos. Shim yishpach don sha'achel mehem nimtza zemach shira. We'll say this way, literally the way it's translated is, in case one of the karbanos, the blood spilled before being applied to the mizbeach, this last cup of blood would kind of be a composite, a combination of all of the blood of all of the karbanos, and this way every karban had its zrika. Amullah Rabbi Yehuda. But 1 second, I will say, if you're talking about blood that spilled on the ground and never made it to the mizbeach, that means it was never received in a kli. In other words, there was never a proper kabbalah. Kabbalah means that when you shech the animal, you receive the lifeblood in a kli. So if you're telling me now, well, maybe by one of the karbanos, the blood never made it to the mizbeach. It's a mixture of all of the different blood, and we'll just sprinkle, but it never made it to a kli. So the Gemara says, "Mina yadi." So how do you know? How do you know? Rashi says, Mina Yada Rabbi Yehuda in this kabel b'kli. So how do you know if it was or it wasn't perceived in a kli? Alahachi kamrile. Shema lonis kabel b'kli. Rather, maybe the blood on the ground, it never was in a kli. To begin with, if it was never in a kli, Rabbi say, then it's not fit for zrika. To which the Gemara says, Amar lahen apanila amarti ella binis kabel b'kli. To which the Gemara says, you're right. What must be the case? It must be what we're concerned about is it was in the kli and then it somehow fell out of the kli. So mina yada. I don't say how would you know that anyway? Kohanim's reason ain't. Oh, because I'll tell you why. There's no every blood that is quote unquote zrika blood, definitely made it into kanabos. And remember again, the only blood you use for zrika is dam nefesh, the life blood, as opposed to dam tamsis, which is the other blood that flows out. We assume Kohanim's reasoning. What does Kohanim's reasoning? What does it mean that Kohanim are alacritus, right? Kohanim ultimately have zizus. It means Kohanim take their job seriously, and the Kohanim made sure to catch the lifeblood in the kli. Well, 1 second. Is reason amay mishtabich. If the Kohanim are if they're so zoriz, then what? Then what? How did the blood wind up on the ground? And I was about to say, you're telling me that you're concerned that some of the lifeblood wound up on the ground. But now you're telling me Kohanim are reason, so they catch all of the lifeblood ultimately in the kli. Well, if they caught it all in the kli, then how did it wind up on the ground? Agav zrisayu da'avid mishtapach. Because sometimes they're so zariz, they move so quickly that what happens, and obviously you have to understand, this is Erev Pesach. In other words, during the rest of the year, there's not a concern about this. But Erev Pesach, you're talking about the sheer volume of karbanos. Everyone has to move quickly. So because of this reason, so you're dealing with moving around quickly, liquid, inevitably what's going to happen? Some of the blood is going to pour out. It's going to spill out. But 1 second. How do you scoop up blood from the floor? So we'll say, so now what we're assuming is that the blood that was fit for zrika came out of the animal, came into a kli, but because the Kohanim are just scurrying around, they're running, they're moving quickly. Lavdafka, they're running, because remember, there's an assembly, but the point is they're moving everything quickly. Some of the damanef, some of the lifeblood fell out. So what are we going to do at the end? We're just going to scoop up a cup of blood from the end, at the end, pour that on the mizbeach. That way, if some way, somehow, some blood didn't make it to the mizbeach, ultimately now we're taken care of. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. On the ground is both dam, what we call dam chay, the lifeblood, dam chaya, but also dam tamsis. Dam tamsis is the rest of the blood that flows out of the animal. And ultimately, again, that dam tamsis is not fit for the mizbeach. To which the Gemara says, "V'halo dam tamsis murabo." Rabbi Yehuda tamei amar dam tamsis dam ma'alyuhu. Rabbi Yehuda holds that no, even dam tamsis, which is the rest of the blood that flows out of the animal, not just the lifeblood, is fit for zrika as well. The sanya dam tamsis ba'ashara. Rabbi Yehuda amar behi karis. And also the Bryce says, this is talking about the consumption of blood, that if you consume damat hamsis, which is non-life blood, it's allowed. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's karis. But Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that for kapara purposes, for atonement purposes, for sprinkling purposes, dam tamsis is not usable. Only dam chay is usable. Shneimar ki adam hu benefesh yichaper. Because the blood of the soul will achieve kapara, will create kapara. Amud beis, dam shanefesh yotze bo mechaper, dam shein hanefesh yotze bo eino mechaper. It is only blood through which life leaves the animal that achieves kapara, but other blood, i.e. dam tamsis, which is the rest of the blood that flows out of the animal, does not achieve kapara. Rashi calls it the dam kiluach, which is the blood that flows out of the animal. Rather, Rabbi Yehuda goes going to his reasoning. The Amar ein dam mevatel dam. Rather, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that blood is not mevatel. There's no bittel by dam. So therefore, again, I acknowledge the fact that halacha lemaisa, when the Kohen scoops up the cup of blood at the end of all of this, we'll say, what's his logic? His logic is that in case for some reason there was any carbon that did not have a proper zrika, this blood, which is a mixture of all of the blood from all of the different carbonos, this blood, I'm going to take it, I'm going to pour it on the mizbeach. The Gemara's Shiloh, so let's go through the process. But what about the fact that it was never in a kli? We assume that what? It wasn't a kli. That every dam nefesh was in the kli, but because of the zrius of the karma, it poured out. What about the fact, isn't the dam tamsis? There's so much more of us that we'll call it regular blood than lifeblood. So isn't the regular blood, isn't it mevatel, the lifeblood? To which Rabbi Yehuda holds, in dam mevatel dam. One type of blood is not mevatel, another type of blood, and halacha lemaisa, it works. Tanya, Omna Rabbi Yehuda Chum, l'divreichen, lama polkikin es ha'azara. So let's listen to this. So Omna Rabbi Yehuda Chum, so Rabbi Yehuda said to Chachamim, so so why do they go ahead and plug up the azar? Now both say, now look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, l'divreichen lama polkikin, es nekev chomas ha'azar sha'adamim mis'avim ba'ama, yotzim bolochot, so they're poking also b'chal arei Pesachim. So we'll say, now listen, so we'll say, this is a fact that was not included in the Mishnah, right? In the Mishnah, the only plugging up of the Azara was when at the end, right? At the end, what they would do is they would stop up the channel, flood the Azara, and then ultimately unplug the channel so that all the water could flow out. Now, I said, this is incredible. This price is pointing out to us there was another plugging up, an earlier plugging up. Look at Rashi. L'divrei lama pokikin es nekev chomas ha'azara shadamim hamisarvin ba'ama yotzin bo luchotz vayapokikin osa b'chol arvei Pesachim. Supposed to listen to this. Apparently, there was an earlier plug-up. So you're say in general, there were holes in the courtyard, right? What was the point of the holes in the courtyard? To allow blood to drain out of the courtyard. That's what they would do. I will say, remember again, the Gemara pointed out that the blood, we saw this earlier, that the blood used to flow from the Beis HaMikdash into the valley below the Harabayis, and the farmers would go out and purchase the sacrificial blood to be used as fertilizer for their fields. So there was a drainage system in the Azar that would take out any sacrificial blood. They plugged up the drains when they were shechting, when the various groups came in. They plugged up the drains. So I say, now watch this. So Rabbi Yehuda says, according to you, Chachamim, why did they plug up the drains? So we'll say, so Rabbi Yehuda says, according to me, it makes perfect sense, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda says, why do they plug up the drains? Because we'll say, what do they want to do? At the end of all three groups, what do they want to be able to do? Scoop up a cup of blood. Because that blood, remember, again, we assume is a mixture of all of the blood from all of the karbanos. That way, if for some reason one carbon, for some reason, didn't have a zrika, that mixture blood satisfies the criteria for zrika for any carbon that may have missed its zrika. Because again, even those dam tamtzis, ein dam mevatel dam, so on and so forth. So he says, according to me, it makes sense. But the chachamim, you feel that you don't need that final collection, right? That final cup of blood. Why did they plug up the azor? Why did they prevent the blood from draining? Rabbi said this is actually pretty wild. Amru v'cham said Rabbi Yehuda, shevachu libnei Aaron sheyelchu ad arkavosehem bidam, because it was an incredible, beautiful thing for the Kohanim to walk up to their knees in sacrificial blood. Right? It was right. It was beautiful for the Kohanim to be able to walk up into their knees in sacrificial blood. So Gemara says, but 1 second. It's interesting, as if like the biggest problem with this image is the chatzitza issue. Right? So it's so fascinating. So I'll say, so isn't this a chatzitza? So remember again, there could be nothing that interposes or interrupts between the Kohanim's feet and ultimately the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. Well, if there's blood, if they're walking up to their knees in blood, isn't this problematic, a chatzitza? To which the Gemara says, no, lachu ve'inochotze. It's because blood is a liquid. A liquid does not create the chatzitza. And its position. Kedesanya, hadam v'hadiyo v'hachile v'advash. If you have blood or ink or chelev, right, or dvash, or ultimately again honey, yeveshim chotzitzin, if they are dry and then therefore become a solid mass, they create the chatzitza. Loch in chotzitzin, but if they are wet, they do not create the chatzitza. So ultimately again, therefore, walking up to your knees in blood for the Kohanim did not create the chatzitza. And I will say again, this was considered to be a shach. I will say again, it's hard. It's a little bit hard for us to imagine because, well, it's not hard to imagine. It's just hard to imagine doing it, right? Because for us, the notion of walking up into our knees in blood does not exactly seem to be the greatest shavach of anything. But that's, remember, also because, unfortunately, we're removed from a base, we're removed from karbanos. But for the Kohanim, the notion of being up to your knees in blood represented, again, the sheer volume of karbanos brought by Klal Yisrael, which is just an incredible thing. There's another issue. But we'll say, obviously, if the Kohanim are walking up to their knees in blood, their clothing becomes disgusting, right? That means your clothing becomes disgusting. And isn't that a problem with Tanan? How you begadav mitushdashin va'amid avodaso psula. This is incredible. If the Kohanic clothing was dirty, when the Kohen did the avodah is pasal. Both say, isn't this incredible? That the Kohen has to be in a pristine state. His clothing must be clean when he does the avodah. So isn't the notion of, obviously, if you're walking up until your knees in blood, your clothing is soaked with blood, that would invalidate the avodah. So both say, such an incredible yesod, to which the Gemara says, maybe you'll say, v'chitema demad l'ma'anahu. Maybe say, no, not a problem. The Kohen could just lift up his robe. Or so just lift up his robe, right? He'll lift up the begadim above his knees, and that way again nothing gets blood soaked. That doesn't work. Vatanya mido bad mido or mado kimidaso shalayach v'lo yosef. This is incredible. The Kohanic garments were tailored, right? Were tailor made. What do they call it? Not tailor made. Custom made. Custom made. Right? So again, it fit the Kohanim exactly. And the idea was that halacha l'maisi, you didn't notice, if you had to walk around with your robe, holding your robe up, that was not proper big day kuna. And the idea was not only was it custom made, but it also had to sit on the body in a normal way. So you can't walk around doing the avodah with your robe pulled up either. So it can't be too long. You can't hold it up. What are we talking about? We're talking about, when they walk in the blood like this, when they were taking the limbs to the ramp of the mizbech, which is not a form of avodah. Therefore, it's not a problem if their clothing gets dirty, or it's not a problem even if they hold up their clothing because it's not avodah. To which the Gemara below, it's not avodah. That's not true. The taking of the sacrificial limbs to the ramp, I will say, requires a kohen. The fact that it requires a kohen tells us that what? That in fact it is a form of avodah. Sanya, both say the pasuk says the kohen will take everything to the mizbeach. That refers to the taking of the sacrificial limbs to the mizbeach. So you see, both say anything that requires a kohen by definition is avodah. So therefore, if you need a kohen to take the limbs to the mizbeach, that by definition is a form of avodah. Ella ba'olachas itzim lema'aracha delav avodahi. Rather, we'll say, what's the case? It must be talking about a situation where they were taking the wood to the pyre on the mizbech, which was not an avodah. Delav avodahi. Or beilachas evarim lakevesh halachas dam miha hechi azli. That's fine, but what did they do about the taking of the limbs to the mizbeach or the taking of the blood? Those ultimately again are avodos. Miha, so the Gemara says hechi azli. Demaski aitztebi. I both say this is fascinating. On Erev Pesach, they had something very unique. They had a platform in the Beis Hamikdash. So I will say, what they did is like this. So the Gemara says they plugged up the drains in the Azara, so that the Azara literally filled with blood. But they also had constructed a platform that allowed the Kohanim to walk above the blood. This way, again, the Shevach was there because you saw the blood level went so high, which was a dramatic testament to the sheer volume of the number of karbanos. But the Kohanim did not need to walk into the blood themselves. Rashi just points out over here that ultimately, again, since the platform was part of the Beis Hamikdash, so we'll say in general, there's another discussion about building onto the Beis Hamikdash. You just can't make an addition on the Beis Hamikdash. So the platforms were considered to be part of the edifice of the Beis Hamikdash itself. Quite incredible. Keitza tolunu mafshidin. So remember again, so the Mishnah said, what did you do? You went ahead and they suspended the karbanos, right? They would put the karbanos on the hooks, they would flay the karban, and then they would go ahead and take out all the sacrificial parts and put it into bowls. So I'll say ultimately, and I will say another way, it sounds like is that the Yisrael who was flaying the animal, no problem, Yisrael could flay the animal, that he would take out the sacrificial parts, put it in the bowl, and he would offer it up. Sounds like the Yisrael would offer the sacrificial parts, which the Gemara says, Atu gufei hava maktilu, would the Yisrael offer the sacrificial parts? Ema laktir gabe mizbeach. Rather, no. What it means is the Yisrael might put the sacrificial parts in the bowl, but he would not offer it up, but rather he would prepare it to be offered. It would be the Kohen who ultimately would offer it up. Biyatas hakas rishona. Ultimately, after the first group went out, Tana kol echad ve'echad nosein pischo barbas. This is so beautiful. After the whole process was finished, what would happen? Everybody would take the Karban Pesach. He would take his lamb. No sein pischo ba'oro. He would put the meat, the actual lamb, inside of the hide, umafshil la'achorav, and then he would put it on his back, right? So let's say if you could imagine, you would hold the hide from the front. Ultimately, again, the Pesach itself would be on my back. Mafshil la'achorav amrav ilish tayus, just like an Arab merchant. When the Arab merchants would go to kind of sell their wares, they would hold the wares on their back, right? They'd hold it with their hands like over their shoulder, and the merchandise would be slung over their shoulder. So too again, when the Jew would leave the Beis Hamikdash carrying his Korban Pesach, the meat itself would be wrapped up in the hide of the animal, and the Yisrael would walk holding the animal slung over his shoulder. Hadrun alach tamid nishchat. Rabosai mazel tov. Yashakar on the completion of the parak. Emir Hashem. Tomorrow morning we begin the new parak. Shkach Rabosai. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Can you see? Oh, here. Testing. Can you? Good morning. How are you? Can you test? Jared? Can you hear? Off. Amen.